Well, good morning, everyone, and Happy New Year. As we get started on the 117th Congress, it is, to say the least, let us live in interesting times, and we clearly do. I think most Americans and most Virginians probably have been following politics over the last couple of weeks, and it's been erratic, to say the least. On the positive side, the president finally, just last week, signed the COVID relief package that I was proud to be part of the bipartisan group that helped negotiate. This long overdue relief, close to $1 trillion, both in direct payments, assistance to small businesses, assistance to for rental assistance, for unemployment assistance, for food assistance, a host of other programs such as broadband and additional assistance for vaccine distribution will provide close to $15 billion to Virginians. That will come in the form of either direct payments, unemployment benefits, assistance to small business, assistance through the state and local government in terms of K-12 assistance, higher education assistance. And while it was pretty awful that the president threatened to veto that legislation, it did receive overwhelmingly bipartisan support. Matter of fact, it was 92-6 in the Senate. In the case, I just realized I don't have an earphone. Oh, we've got it there. I'm sorry. Sorry, guys. So we've got, on one hand, the COVID relief package coming out, enormously bipartisan, President signing $15 billion of relief to Virginians, extraordinarily important as we're still struggling with COVID. Matter of fact, as we all know as well, we saw a record number of cases, 5,000 new cases, I believe, on Saturday in Virginia. In many parts of Virginia, particularly Southwest, we're seeing numbers hit records for the extent of the whole virus. So COVID is still out there, but help is on the way in terms of federal assistance. We also saw bipartisan action taken overcoming President Trump's veto of the defense authorization bill. Again, legislation that's extraordinarily important for Virginia. Close to 80 votes in the Senate voted to override the president. A 3% pay raise for our military members, a second Virginia-class submarine, additional focus on military housing, an issue that's terribly important to me. My additional legislation on 5G so that we can make sure America maintains its leadership in next generation telecommunications. Additional legislation of mine in terms of supporting American semiconductor investments. But again, a case of broad bipartisan support. What took place in both of these bills, though, were the president, in his waning days, in his efforts to kind of disrupt our democracy and throw temper tantrums, threatened to veto the COVID bill and did veto the defense authorization bill. In both cases, broad bipartisan coalitions overcame that. Now, moving forward, we've got what traditionally has been a pro forma event happening tomorrow, January 6th, where the House and the Senate meet in tandem to basically count the certified electoral votes that have already been certified in states all across the country, including, obviously, the Commonwealth of Virginia. We know the results. 306 votes will be for President-elect Joe Biden, and substantially less, obviously, for Donald Trump. But again, in an unprecedented way, Donald Trump and his unwillingness to acknowledge this loss is continually trying to disrupt the process and our democracy. And unfortunately, he's now being enabled by at least 12 of senators on the Republican side who will help bring about this process. It will not change the results. We will go through a lot of bluster, but has been pointed out by the Senate Intelligence Committee report on foreign interference. One of the recommendations we made was American elected officials should not undermine Americans' confidence in our election. That plays directly into the hands of our adversaries, whether it be Russia, China, Iran, or others. And unfortunately, we again see Donald Trump once again putting his own personal ego ahead of American national interest, and now being enabled by at least a dozen members in the Senate and a number of members in the House. The hypocrisy of this effort is stunning. In many cases, members in certain states are contesting the results in those very same states, which would throw their own elections into doubt. But in some cases, loyalty to Donald Trump seems to well exceed allegiance to the Constitution. What we've seen is if there were efforts to come forward with additional evidence, that would have been brought forward in the courts. We've seen over 60 courts rule against these Trump efforts. What is really happening here is Donald Trump and a small group of legislators are trying to cheat the American public out of the fair election results that have been validated by Donald Trump's own head of election security, Donald Trump's own former attorney general, by state and local election officials of both parties, by over 60 judges. The results are clear. Donald Trump has been defeated. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will be the next president and vice president. But we could be going through a couple of very rocky days as Mr. Trump has called his supporters into town to protest or potentially create violent circumstances. In my role as vice chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, I've been in touch with law enforcement because of the domestic terrorism potential. And I can assure you that law enforcement, intel, the D.C. mayor is even calling in the National Guard. Our processes will be protected, but this is an unfortunate way for this failed president to exit his last few days in office. But we will get through this. I think by the time we emerge on Thursday at some point, we will once again see, at least in the Senate, the same kind of overwhelming majorities that passed COVID, that overcame the Trump veto of the NDAA. I think we will also see overwhelming majorities, close to 80 senators, stand by our Constitution and certify the results of electing and certifying Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as president and vice president. But stay tuned. It will probably be a wild next 72 hours. With that, let me go ahead and open it up for questions.
Senator Tom Fitzgerald from
Petersburg. I have a question dovetailing on what you were asking about with the what you were just talking about with the disruptions in the Electoral College and the ramifications. As you well know, here in Virginia, we have gubernatorial race coming up this year, and one of the participants is unapologetically a Donald Trump supporter. I think I'm speaking of Senator Amanda Chase. She's made a lot of noise, very similar to the noise that Trump and the others have been making about election fraud in Virginia. My question to you is, I know as a federal legislator, you kind of stay out of things like this, but as a former governor, it has to probably gnaw at you. Are you worried about how the gubernatorial election is going to play out? Especially with this inflammatory rhetoric that is, right up here, right up front. Or do you think that Virginia will see through it?
Well, first of all, I believe history will look back on this period and some of the antics of Mr. Trump, particularly the extraordinarily embarrassing and potentially illegal phone call he made to the Georgia Secretary of State this past weekend, where he tried to basically overthrow the election. Luckily, officials of goodwill of both political parties have stood up to that kind of threatening attitude. We saw it when he tried to switch folks in Georgia. We saw it in terms of Pennsylvania. We saw it in Michigan. I think the strength of our democracy is quite strong. We had a record number of Americans vote, both for Joe Biden and Donald Trump. I can assure you from the intel standpoint, we thought before the election there might be a chance of violence. God willing, we've not seen that violence take place to date. We've seen the recount process go through as it should in the states where recounts took place. And when we come to Virginia, I have huge confidence in our electoral boards across the Commonwealth. They are bipartisan. I have huge confidence in how the presidential elections were carried out this past year. We had record numbers of Virginians turn out. I was proud of the fact that I've now received more votes than any elected official in Virginia history, and we had to take on a new process where people were voting early. I think Virginians will reject the kind of extremism, whether just as they rejected Donald Trump, I think they will reject it in those people who are the pale imitators that are going to be brought forward this coming year. I hope, in many ways, that, and again, this will be up to my friends on the Republican side to determine who their nominee will be. I think politics is done best when we have a center-left party and a center-right party that argue policy but don't try to undermine people's faith in our basic democratic process. And I think our election process in Virginia is safe, secure. The results were overwhelming in Virginia, and I think we will see that same kind of safe process go forward with the gubernatorial, lieutenant governor, attorney general, and all of the House of Delegates races coming up next year.
Senator
Mitchell Miller from WTOP.
Hey guys,
and I wondered if we could just
hey guys,
jump back
one
to
at a time. I can't. Do we have somebody from our side? Val, can you help navigate this a little bit? Who's up next, please?
Tom Fitzgerald from Fox 5.
Okay.
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Senator, I'll give you two quick ones. There seems to be some disputed information this morning about whether or not Vice President Pence will preside over this count tomorrow. Apparently, Senator Grassley is saying now that he will. Vice President Pence's office is saying now that they expect him to be there. Are you hearing anything on that? And also, how long do you expect this to go on Wednesday? Well, there was a previous challenge to Ohio. That took 3 hours. We're looking at, roughly, theoretically, half a dozen states that these objections could be raised to. Could this go into Thursday or Friday, possibly? What are you being told on the Democratic side?
Well, let me try to answer both these, recognizing that we're a little bit in uncharted ground. I've not heard this question about the vice president not showing up. I hope he would show up. It's his constitutional duty. But the confusion may arise from the fact that it is the job of Vice President Pence to, basically record the electors' count in the joint session that takes place in the House. If someone then raises an objection, a House member and a Senate member, the bodies then break to the House, staying in the House. The Senate returns to the Senate. And when we have that debate within the Senate, it's my understanding that Senator Grassley, as the president pro tem of the Senate, does oversee that debate, but that Vice President Pence is the ministerial figure basically doing the counting in the joint session. So I think that may be the confusion, but I don't know whether any news about Vice President Pence potentially not showing up. I actually think it could be worse than what we saw in terms of the Ohio circumstance back in, I think, 2005. Because of the voting procedures due to COVID in the House, the guesstimate that's been given to us is that each state's contesting could take 4 hours. That would take a couple hours of debate, literally up to a couple hours of voting, particularly on the House side. And obviously time in between as you reconvene. If those who are trying to gum up the works, who are simply trying to be foot soldiers of Donald Trump, actually contest all 6 states, you're looking at potentially 24 hours plus. So you could see us go into potentially Thursday afternoon. I'm going to be there as long as it takes to do my duty to uphold the Constitution, to make sure that all the votes of Americans are upheld, and this process moves forward. But it will be, the thing that I will worry about, one of the things I worry about, I mentioned in my opening comments, concerns we've had from the Senate Intelligence Committee. I'm very proud of the fact that no member of the Senate Intelligence Committee is part of this cabal. We know how dangerous it is when foreign governments try to intervene in our elections and try to discredit our democratic process. But think about the spectacle that will take place on screens all over the world due to Donald Trump's ego if these kind of process trying to gum up the works goes on for 24 hours. You could not ask for a greater propaganda win for Vladimir Putin or the Iranian leadership or the North Korean leadership or the Chinese leadership or authoritarians anywhere in the world than to have in the United States of America, the greatest democracy in the world, 24 hours of a small group of Trump supporters trying to overthrow an election. That is not in the best interest of America. It makes us appear weaker to our friends and adversaries alike. And again, I just hope, but I don't expect this to come out of Mr. Trump because we know where his allegiances lie. But I do hope that maybe some of these individuals, after a state or two, will decide to cease this, frankly, this process that does nothing more than tarnish America's reputation around the world.
And now I'll take that question from Tim at WJLA.
Hey, Senator. I wanted to talk about the vaccine and the distribution in Virginia. What are your thoughts on the way it's progressing? How much have you kind of overseen the distribution? And we've heard complaints that it's not going fast enough. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are on all that.
I'm concerned that the vaccine distribution is not going fast enough, not only in Virginia, but across the whole country. And I think this, again, comes from a failure of leadership at the national level, at the federal level. I mean, an administration that is constantly underreported and underemphasized the serious nature of this virus, an administration that has not used tools like the Defense Production Act, which could have smoothed the distribution of the vaccine. The fact that while there are substantial dollars in this new COVID relief package, and Virginia is going to receive, I think, close to $500 million, I believe was the number, that is both vaccine distribution, PPE, testing, tracing. It takes a while to get those dollars out, to hire the additional people in health departments, to just get it administered. We could have had these dollars flow a couple of weeks earlier if Mr. Trump hadn't held up signing of this COVID relief package. Are there improvements that need to be made? Absolutely. I think the governor has recognized that. He acknowledged Virginia needs to move quicker. It's my hope now that this legislation's been signed, dollars are flowing, that we can see some of the kinks get out of the system fairly quickly, not only in Virginia but around the country. It's embarrassing when a country like Bahrain in the Middle East has vaccinated its citizenry at a rate of about 8-1 over what we are vaccinating in America.
Senator David Horak with WVNS in covering Tazewell County.
Sure.
Just wanted to piggyback off of the election certification for tomorrow. Your colleague in representing West Virginia, Shelley Moore Capito, who is on the Republican side, went public with a media statement saying that she is going to vote to certify the results, saying that we need to move forward and unite. Have you heard any other Republicans, aside from her and others who are vocal to or from her, and have you heard from any other senators from the Republican side who are voting to certify the results, contrary to Senator Cruz and those who are looking to object? And what's the tone from that side, from what you've heard?
Well, first of all, the vast majority of Republicans are going to vote to certify. I'm very proud of the fact that the bipartisan group of 9 or 10 of us who put together the COVID package. We came out with a statement this weekend, including my Republican colleagues like Mitt Romney and Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, Bill Cassidy, all indicating they're going to vote to certify. Leader McConnell, who I disagree with on a number of items, is voting to certify. My friend Rob Portman from Ohio is voting to certify. Matter of fact, I think at the end of the day, we will see between 75 and 80 total senators vote to certify. All the Democrats, and I believe north of or close to 40 of the Republican senators. So the numbers, at least in the Senate, who are part of this cabal, who are blindly following Donald Trump, are really a very small minority. And they're, for the most part, either new senators who may not understand the process, or a number of folks who want to try to run for president in 2024 and hope to inherit the Trump base. But I do think it's really important, even though there is, I think, enormous frustration. I particularly feel this from my Republican friends who are frankly outraged that this cabal is going against the Constitution. But the overwhelming majority of senators are going to be voting to certify. So I applaud Shelley Moore Capito, but again, I can take you state through state. And I point out the fact that at least so far, none of the Senate Republicans on the Intelligence Committee, and we've got very, very conservative members on the Intelligence Committee, are part of this cabal. They are all, to my knowledge, voting to certify. Again, because I think they've seen how foreign governments will view this action as at least a propaganda win, because if Vladimir Putin can say, hey, look, the Americans don't have a clean democratic process, why should they have the ability to attack our process in Russia? One more time of Mr. Trump never being willing to cross Vladimir Putin, something that has been maybe the only consistent portion of his presidency. And again, I would point that out as recently as this remarkable hack into our government and private sector that many members of the Trump administration have called out Russia. But again, Mr. Trump has not called out Russia.
Up next, we have a question from Mitchell at WTOP.
Hi, Senator. Wanted to follow up again related to this whole issue that's coming up tomorrow. What can be done to restore confidence in the electoral system, given the fact that there is such a strong divide now between Democrats and Republicans? Polls consistently show that many Republicans just do not trust the system anymore. As somebody who's involved in your position on the Intelligence Committee, is there anything that Congress can do or that President-elect Joe Biden can do moving forward to try to restore some kind of balance again?
Well, first of all, if there'd been any evidence that would merit a thoughtful review by our court system, we've seen 60 cases filed. Trump has lost virtually every one of them. We've seen local elected officials, state officials, Democrat and Republican alike, all stand up and say there's no evidence. We've seen recount after recount not showing any substantial change in the vote. It is virtually every person who's on this press call today. I read all the clips. You may come from a conservative network or conservative outlet, but I've not seen any of your mainstream reporting indicate that there's been fraud or that there's any path where Donald Trump won this election. So it should concern us all that one, the power that Mr. Trump has to try to influence his supporters, and two, the challenge we have with social media where people can tune out any kind of objective indicator. If this was only Democrats saying this, or if it was only legislators, but we've got the judicial branch validating this. We've got state and local officials validating Biden's win. We even have, the vast majority of Trump officials, like his attorney general, like his head of election security. Now, they all get fired when they speak the truth, But it's a real challenge when people still say, I'm going to believe a social media site or Mr. Trump rather than any of the other validators in our system. I think we should all be concerned about this. I think one of the things that Joe Biden can and must do is continue to reach out to those Americans who didn't support him. I think folks like me need to continue to try to build these bipartisan coalitions so that we can show we're actually trying to get things done for the American public. I think the COVID bill is an example of that. And I hope that the Republican Party will once again become the Republican Party and not simply an arm of Trumpism. I think that would be healthier for our country. But this is something, Mitchell, that I think we're going to have to grapple with. But it goes a lot to the way people access their information. And I've been talking about this for the last 4 years. The fact that these social media sites have none of the responsibilities that everyone on this call has in terms of having any allegiance to truth ought to be a concern. When 65% of Americans get some or all their news from Facebook and Google, and we have to rely on the goodwill of Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg in terms of what is factual or not, that's not a system that can stand up to fearmongers, hate mongers, or folks who preach far-fetched theories.
Thank you.
Up next, we have time for a couple more questions. We have Tim from WSLF.
Good morning, Senator. Thanks for the time. Two quick questions for you. One in regards to COVID. What are your thoughts on a national lockdown? Other countries are doing it, and President-elect Biden said that he supported it. And then in regards to the new Congress, what are some issues or goals that are top priority for you?
Well, first of all, I think what we need to do when President Biden comes in is do more to follow the medical advice. I think, in terms of, closing restaurants or school attendance, I do think there's ways we can get our kids back to school. I think we've shown that not only in America, but in many countries. I think, frankly, better leadership from the White House in terms of demonstrating mask wearing, continuing to realize that we're finally seeing the light at the end of the tunnel here in terms of getting this vaccination out. If we can just get a couple more months of good behavior, I think we will start to see the vaccine at numbers kick in. So let's follow that. I know we're all tired of it. I'm tired of it as well. But let's take these next couple of steps. In terms of legislative priorities for me in the next Congress, I do want to make sure that we work on what another relief package might look like come April or May, particularly if the economy is still in challenges. I want to one of the things that we didn't do as much in the last COVID relief package was broadband deployment. I think it is extraordinarily important that every home in Virginia has access to affordable, high-speed broadband. I want to continue to play a role as either vice chair or chair of the Intelligence Committee, depending on what happens in Georgia today, on trying to make sure that America stands strong against adversaries like China, particularly in terms of technology development. I also have been working for a number of years on how we can make this economy work for a broader group of Americans. And I've got a series of ideas around making sure that, no matter what kind of work you do in America, you get benefits with that work. And those benefits are portable, so you can move from job to job and continue to accrue benefits. I want to make sure that companies have new incentives to invest in their workforce in a much more radical way. I want to make sure that companies, and I say this as somebody who's proud to have spent more time in business than I have in politics, that companies invest not only for the value of their shareholders, but their employees and communities as well. And I think with a Biden administration and someone that will be willing to work in a bipartisan fashion, a lot of these ideas we're going to be able to act upon. I have to tell you, in my 12 years I've been in this job, I've never been more excited about the opportunities, the potential, and I do think the kind of coalition that I helped build around COVID, a bipartisan coalition, that there's going to be many more of those to come, and I'm looking forward to the opportunity.
David Horak with one more question, sir.
Sure.
Just recently, Virginia, among one of at least 7 states, enacted legislation capping insulin prices for those that are on state-regulated health insurance or the Virginia Health Exchange. And we've seen other states like West Virginia, Colorado, Illinois, so on and so forth, having similar legislation. Is there any movement on Capitol Hill on passing some sort of universal legislation that would cap such prices for insulin and other lifesavers for families that are in the same situation across all 50 states?
Well, let me start by saying this is not political, it's personal to me. My daughter's a type 1 diabetic, and thank God we've been able to afford her insulin. But to see the prices of insulin shoot up, a drug that's been around for 100 years, is outrageous. And I think there is a chance to address this on a national basis, and I've got legislation that would finally take on the question of drug pricing. Drugs in our country cost 2 and 3 times more than anywhere else in the industrial world. And I'm actually working on a bipartisan way, looking at some of the models of how, for example, Germany has a very interesting plan around drug pricing that still allows companies to bring new drugs to market and make a profit. But then we actually look at their efficacy to see how well they're used, and then come back in and put some appropriate pricing controls in place. There are other models out there. It is time for Americans to take on this issue of drug pricing. It is not fair that Americans pay for the research and development for drugs for the whole world, and the rest of the world benefits, and Americans pay 2 and 3 times the price. This will be one of those issues where I think there is huge bipartisan support, and I hope we actually start with insulin, because again, for the families across Virginia, across America, who've got diabetes, who need that insulin on a daily basis, it is crippling the costs. And there's no reason these costs should be going up as much as they have on a drug that's been around, as I said, for 100 years.
Thank you, sir.
Anyone else? I know I got started slow on this. It was a little rambly, but I seem to pick up my pace here. So if anybody's got one more question, then we can sign off.
Caitlin Pym from WHSC. Can you hear me? I just had a question. I don't know if you already answered this, but how do you feel about the stimulus? Do you think it's sufficient enough for Americans who are unemployed or maybe working part-time now because of the pandemic?
The stimulus package in total was almost $1 trillion. It will put $15 billion into the Virginia economy, both through funds that will go directly to the state, funds that will go to the unemployed, funds that will go to small business support. And I think this stimulus, which I helped craft, was really geared for a 4-month period. Would I have liked to have seen more direct payments to Americans? Yes, in a perfect world. Would I have liked to have seen more assistance to state and local government? Absolutely. But we can come back and revisit those. But with the fact that we've got close to $1 trillion, this is literally the second largest relief package in the history of our country, second only to the CARES package that took place in March. I think it's going to provide much needed relief. We've extended unemployment not only for traditional workers but for gig workers. We've plussed that up $300 a week. We've put in rental assistance. We've put in food assistance. We've put in that critical support for small businesses. I see the number of restaurants that kind of made it through the summer and the fall, but starting to hit this cold weather are really hurting. We've got assistance in there for those venues. So I think it was the process of politics is the perfect can be the enemy of the good. It's not a perfect bill, but boy, oh boy, close to $1 trillion, over $15 billion going to the Virginia economy right now. It's going to be a lifesaver for a lot of folks. And then under President Biden, if there are places we missed or places that need to be reinforced, we can come back and revisit. What was the most important was we got this bill done. And it was so disappointing that the president played games with it for about 10 days, threatening not to sign it when people's lives were at stake, literally, in terms of going off unemployment or getting kicked out of their homes. Thank goodness he finally did sign it less than a week ago on December 27th. I think it's a good piece of work. Well, everyone, I think I know we've gone a little over. I appreciate everybody getting on. Again, I hope everybody has a happy new year. Stay tuned for the next 48 to 72 hours. We will get through this. I want to close with simply a comment that you can, in all these things, you can either view them as glass half empty or glass half full. I like to look back. I made a mention of this, but as crazy as the time has been since the election, I think about my role from the Intelligence Committee when we were looking in October about what we were looking forward to with the November election. We were afraid of foreign interference. We were afraid Americans might not turn up to vote because of COVID. We were afraid of the potential of violence at polling stations. We were afraid that would the system withstand the kind of contests that we knew would come about if Donald Trump lost. Well, I would argue the system, for all its challenges, has come through. Americans voted in record numbers. Foreign intervention was kept to a bare minimum. Our intelligence community did its job. Americans voted peacefully, even though they obviously have very different views on both Biden and Trump. The court system, the recount system worked. Even the political process, while it took too long, the COVID relief bill, overcoming Mr. Trump's spite about the defense bill to make sure that we would do what's right for our soldiers and sailors and Marines and airmen, we got those jobs done. And while we go into this next 72 hours with some trepidation, our country will get through this process as well. I'm ready to turn the page to a new administration, to one where everything is not relying upon the ego of the guy in the White House, but where we actually put our country's interests first. I think an awful lot of my friends in both political parties are willing to turn that page as well, and better days ahead for our country and for Virginia. Thanks so much.